God is saying to Moses, and God is saying to you, get up and go do it. Get up and go tell people about me. What are you wasting time for? Get it done. I want to close with something that really blew me away. You guys will think this is, kind of cool until you don't really understand it until you've been to Africa. I've been to Africa now. I spent 21 days in Africa, and I saw how these people lived on a day-to-day basis. I saw what they went through. I saw what they ate every day for lunch and for dinner. I saw how they were treated by other people. And while I was in Africa, I was kind of researching some stuff, and I got back here, and I found something that literally blew me away. It's a journal entry of a missionary who was in Africa as a little boy. He was in a different part of Africa, but all the same. I want you to listen to what he writes. Each one of you, I want you to look right up here and pay close attention. Listen to what this missionary writes about being in Africa. You want to find out if you're called to be a missionary, listen to this. He says, I was always perplexed by Psalm 126 until I went to Sahel. That's a vast stretch of savanna, more than 4,000 miles wide, just under the Sahara Desert. Listen, this is the missionary writing. He says, in Sahel, all the moisture comes in a 4-month period. All the rain, all of everything only comes in a 4-month period. He said May, June, July, and August. After that, not a drop of rain falls for 8 months. Listen, the ground cracks from dryness, and so do your hands and feet. The wind of the Sahara pick up the dust and throw it thousands of feet into the air. It then comes slowly drifting across West Africa, as fine as grit. Listen, it gets inside your mouth, it gets inside your watch, and it stops it. The year's food, listen to this. This is the missionary writing. The year's food, of course, must all be grown in those 4 months. They've got 4 months to grow food for every person living in Africa, in that part. People grow sorghum and milo in these small little fields. Now listen to what he walks you through. He says October and November, these are beautiful months. He says the grain bins are full, the harvest has come. People sing and dance. They eat 2 meals a day. The sorghum is ground between 2 stones to make flour, and then a mush which is consistent of yesterday's cream of wheat. That's what he compares it to. He says the sticky mush is eaten hot. They roll it into little balls between their fingers, drop it into a bit of sauce, then pop it into their mouth. The meal lies heavy on their stomach so they can sleep and not be hungry. Listen, it gets worse. Then he says December comes, and the grain bins begin to recede. Many families omit the morning meal. They stop eating meals in the morning, so they're eating 1 meal a day now. Certainly, by January, not one family is still eating 2 meals a day. They're not allowed to. By February, the evening meal diminishes. The meal shrinks to even more during March, and children succumb to sickness. He says you don't stay well on half a meal a day, on just a little piece of what they were eating. Then listen to this. April is the month that haunts my memory. He says, in it, you hear the babies crying in the twilight. Most of the days are passed with only an evening cup of a little bit of a grain mixture in water. He says, then inevitably, it happens. A 6 or 7-year-old boy comes running to his father one day with sudden excitement, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, we've got grain," he shouts. "Son, you know we haven't had grain for weeks." "Yes, we have," the boy insists. "Out in the hut where we keep the goats, there's a leather sack hanging up on the wall." He says, "I reached up and put my hand down in there. Daddy, there's grain in there. Give it to Mom so she can make flour and I won't be starving anymore." The father stands motionless and he says, "Son, we can't do that." He softly explains, "That's next year's seed grain. It's the only thing between us and starvation." He's saying here that they save 1 bag of grain in this old shed. They save it all year for seed. He said that's the only thing that keeps us from starvation. Then the missionary goes on to write, listen to this. "We're waiting for the rains, and then we must use it. The rains finally arrive in May, and when they do, a young boy watches as the father takes the sack from the wall and does the most unreasonable thing imaginable. Instead of feeding his desperately weakened family, He goes to the field, and with tears streaming down his face, he takes the precious seed and throws it away. He scatters it in the dirt. Why? Because he believes in the harvest. He believes in the harvest. You see, he's a man who believes that if he takes this seed and he spreads the seed all out, not only will his starving family be fed, but the rest of the village will be fed as well. All the granaries will be filled. You know, in Africa, they always say sowing seeds, sowing seeds. I was trying to figure out where that came from. It came from this missionary family because they believed in the harvest. Now listen, this is how he finishes up. He says the seed is his. He owns it. He can do anything with it he wants. The act of sowing, it hurts so much that he cries. But as the African pastors say when they preach on Psalm 126, brothers and sisters, this is God's law of the harvest. Don't expect to rejoice later on unless you've been willing to sow in tears. And I want to ask you this now. This is what the missionary writes. How much would it cost you to sow in tears? I don't mean just giving God something from your abundance, but finding a way to say, I believe in the harvest, and therefore I will give what makes no sense. The world would call me unreasonable to do this, but I must sow regardless in order that I may someday celebrate with songs of joy. What's he saying? What can you give up to make a difference? What can you give up to make a difference? He's saying this missionary family that he was a part of literally gave up feeding his family for 4 months so they could feed the whole village. Literally gave up feeding his starving family for 4 months. They had one glass with a little grain and some water stirred around and drank it one time a day for their meal. And he's saying we gave that up so that we could celebrate and joy in heaven someday. What can you give up to make a difference? He said, not something out of your abundance, but something right now. What can you give up? When are you going to start reaching people? When are you going to start telling people about Christ? Because that's the most important thing. And it needs to be the most important thing to you.